We are now recording.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So thanks for coming along. Just to give you a quick bit of introduction. So I'm Mark Carrington. I'm the Chief Technologist at Data 8. I've got quite a few years experience there on both the data quality aspects and of CRM itself. So going quite a way back. And I've got a few tools published in both Microsoft App Source and an XRM Toolbox. We'll be having a look at a few of those today, all free ones. When we think about data quality, there's probably a few problems that you'll often see as you navigate around your system. You might see some duplicate records, you might see some required fields that are missing. So there's some simple things like that that really stand out as you're just using the system. But what I want to have a look at today is some more hidden ones. And there's a whole raft of reasons why some of these problems might come around. So it might be users just literally making up data for one reason or another. It might be some system problems about as your system evolves over time, your schema can change, so what values you allow in different fields can change. And it might be those relationships between records can become inconsistent. It's quite a common theme that we see. So I want to have a look through, so we're going to take 10 different scenarios. I just spend a few minutes on each one, have a look at how they can happen, how you can find them, most importantly, and then what we might be able to do about them. So if you've got any questions about each one, please just shout out. We'll try and cover off any questions before we move on to the next one. Some of the common causes that we'll see. One I'll touch on quite a few times is a particular bugbear of mine. It's having too many required fields in your system. I think as administrators, it's quite easy for us to say, yeah, you just need to fill out all these fields, but real world isn't quite like that. If you're talking to getting salespeople as a common user of the system to fill out these records, and you've got 20 required fields on your lead form, you might not quite get the results that you're really hoping for along the way. Integrations is another common theme that we'll see. Again, that they don't always work quite as smoothly as you might hope. And finally, model-driven apps, so CRM or any of your custom Power Apps, can give an awful lot of freedom for people to edit data in any way they see fit. And often that can lead to some unexpected problems. There are a few tools that we'll have a look at to help along the way. So you can do quite a lot with Advanced Find, so a tool that everybody's got. A tool that probably everybody has got, Fetch XML Builder, will take that a little bit further and help find some extra ones. A tool of mine, SQL for CDS, will let you query your data using standard SQL queries. And you can think of these three as a bit of a progression. So anything you can do in Advanced Find, you can do in Fetch XML Builder or SQL for CDS. Anything you can do in Fetch XML Builder, you can do in SQL for CDS, and there's a few bits that one can do on its own as well. And finally, the data export validation tool. It's a tool by one of my colleagues, Matt Beard. It's designed to help fix problems with the data export service where it syncs data from CRM to an Azure SQL database. But we're actually going to have a look at that sort of out of that context and just use it to find some general data quality issues. So those last three, all XRM Toolbox tools. I kind of assume that everyone's familiar with XRM Toolbox at this point. If not, you should absolutely be getting that first thing. So jumping straight into the first scenario, inactive owners. So this is a problem that we'll see quite often. Simple cause, somebody owns 100 accounts in your system. That person leaves, their user gets deactivated. Those accounts are now, they're still there, they're still owned by that user. And this can cause problems like no one's now looking after those customers. They're not on anybody's list to look after. so you can end up with some lost business. So that's a simple cause that someone's left, no one's bothered reassigning their accounts. And there is an option within the user record to reassign people's records. It's a bit of a blunt instrument because it reassigns absolutely everything, including all their closed activities and everything. So you might want to do it a little bit more manually. Say you want to reassign their active accounts and do it that way, rather than using just reassign absolutely everything. Another way it can happen with workflows, and I'll use workflows as a general term covering all sorts of automation things, so flow and everything as well. You might have something set up to say any new account that comes in with an industry of oil and gas goes to our oil and gas expert. But he's left now. The workflow doesn't care. You can still assign the record to him. So this kit carries on building up even after they've left. Now this is really simple to identify through Advanced Find. If I just pass Advanced Find window over. Hang on, I've got to remember to need to come out of presenting mode. Okay, so we can have a look at all accounts. Hopefully this should be relatively straightforward to most of you. So if we skip down to the related section, and we're going to have a look at the owning user. Now we're going to assume here that all the accounts are owned by users rather than teams, which is a whole other subject. And then we can have a look at the status user is disabled. So we're having a look at all accounts that have an owning user where that owning user's status is disabled. I'm going to find that, and we find we've got one in there. So we now need to go and fix that. So we can either go and bulk select all the ones that come up in here and reassign them, or if we think that it might be an ongoing problem with automations, we need to go back and find what those are and fix those to get it to assign to the correct user. Okay, so rather than keeping switching between presenter mode and not, I'm just going to bring PowerPoint over here. So a very similar situation is having the primary contact being inactive. So you can find this in a very similar way, but it's got kind of a different cause. So if you know that a contact has left, you can go into CRM, you can deactivate that contact record. But if that contact is being used as your primary contact on an account, it still will be the primary contact on the account. And there's absolutely nothing to sort of say that very obviously. So if you have a look in our simple system here, so we've got 3 accounts, a few contacts. You can navigate around. We've got an account there that doesn't have a primary contact. We've got 2 with primary contacts. It's not really very obvious. So if we click around in here, so you can see all the contact details on here. You can see the primary contact. That all looks absolutely fine. If you try and contact Microsoft and actually you find that Bill Gates left some years ago, but he's still there as the primary contact, because although he's been deactivated, it hasn't gone back and updated the account record. And so again, very easy to find. So we can do that with Advanced Find in exactly the same way. Instead of looking for the owning user, we can look for the primary contact. I can just filter on that status. And we can find, yeah, Microsoft has got an inactive primary contact. So a few ways of trying to fix this. So partly you could say it's a training issue. If you deactivate the contact, you need to go back and check whether that was the primary contact of the account. If you wanted to try and be a bit more forceful about it, you could try and enforce this by having some synchronous workflows. So you could say that on the changing of the contact status, it could check that if it is the primary contact, it could stop you doing that until you go and change the primary contact to somebody else. Or you could just periodically run this sort of query to go and find them and fix them. But I would hazard to guess that if you have a look at this today in your CRM system, you'll probably find a few like that would need fixing. Yeah, alternatively, you could have a workflow that allows it to happen, but just automatically removes it as being the primary contact to the account. A slight problem with that is you'd then sort of silently end up with accounts that don't have primary contacts. So yeah, I would probably go with the training route rather than trying to enforce it too harshly, but it depends how important that primary contact is to you. A related one, but
before you move on, Mark,
sure.
You mentioned that you wanted, as you go through the different scenarios, there was a question with regards to the first scenario about the bulk assign from the advanced find, if that would also take completed activities.
So that would depend on your cascade rules. I think out of the box, yes, when you reassign accounts, then the related activities get reassigned, and that then starts messing up the that timeline view, because then it looks like all your activities have been completed on the day you reassigned it. I do actually have another XRM Toolbox tool that allows you to easily change those cascade rules as well. If you have a look for the activity cascade rule plugin, I think it's called, you can go and bulk change those. So yes, that's something to be aware of before you start doing that, especially if you're doing that in large quantities.
Thanks.
Okay. So yes, having a primary contact in a different account is quite a nasty one to find, actually. So if you're, again, looking around these lists of accounts, you can see we've got some contacts against each one. If I go into here, I've got 2 contacts within here. I've got one of them being my primary contact. Actually, if I click into here, you can see this contact, although I got to it as being the primary contact of the data rate account, its account is actually the CRMUG account. So you get this situation where it's just a kind of a tangled mess of relationships. And this can cause problems, especially if you've got some sort of automation about, who should I be sending out my automated email communications to through my marketing automation tool, anything like that. This can, I think, largely happen with you have a habit of moving contacts between accounts as they move jobs. So you probably, if your accounts are largely in a particular industry, the people working there will likely move from one to another on occasion. If you move the contact from one account to the other, similarly to when you deactivate it, it doesn't automatically do anything with that primary contact setting. So yeah, again, you don't want to be in that situation where you're phoning up and asking for somebody that has moved, and in fact, in this case, they've probably moved to a competitor. Now, this one's really difficult to find normally. If we have a look at advanced find, we want to be able to say, find me accounts who have a primary contact where the company of that primary contact is not this account. But all I can do in here is put in individual accounts. So unless I know which one I'm looking for already, I can't find any examples of this. So this is a limitation of the fetch XML query language, which this sits on top of. So the tool we're going to use here to find it is my SQL for CDS tool. So if you are familiar with the SQL query language at all, you can run a query like this now. So we're going to find the names of accounts that have the primary contact where the account is active. We don't really care if this happens for inactive accounts. And where the primary contacts is either not linked to an account or it's linked to a different account than the one that it's the primary contact of. And if I run that query, I can find that happens for data rate, which is the example we just saw on screen. So this tool then starts adding extra layers on top of the fetch XML language. So this isn't actually executing SQL on the underlying database, so you can run this on online systems just as happily as on-prem systems. If we have a look over here, we can see that it has run a standard fetch XML query, if you're familiar with those. But you get this warning up here that it's had to do some extra work on top of it to get to the results that we've actually asked for. So that would be an interesting one, I think, to run on your systems to see if you're affected by that, because again, it's quite a difficult one to spot just by looking around your system generally. You could fix this in very similar ways to the Inactive Primary Contacts solution. So again, training, don't move contacts around. Be careful when you're setting the parent account in the first place. You could have some workflows in place to try and enforce it, to say that you're not allowed to change the company name on the contact while it's still the primary contact for the original account. Or you can actually do bulk updates. So if we go back to SQL for CDS for a second, so this has found them, but you could equally run an update statement here to change the primary contact ID to null and get rid of them in that way. Okay. One quite common one we see is records having the same data in multiple fields. So as an example, you could have a Mr. Test. You could have contacts with the email address also being copied into the last name field, which is quite a common one if you use the Outlook integration. That will happen if you have the option enabled to automatically create contacts or create leads from the senders of emails. If someone sends you an email and their email system is configured to not have a name on the sender, only the email address, that integration will automatically populate the last name of the contact or lead as being the email address. And that's quite easy to see as you browse around, you'll see people's names as being email addresses. But yeah, there's other examples when I think this comes down to the required fields sort of scenario where people don't have the information either because as admins we assume that users are just being lazy or because they just genuinely don't have that information to hand, but they need to put something in to fulfill the required field requirements. So they copy and paste some data from some other fields. So yeah, if you get an inquiry from someone that says, yeah, I'm John, but you don't have a surname, what are you going to do? Are you going to not record that inquiry? Or are you going to put something in the last name field because it's required? So again, we can't find this very easily through fetch XML because what we want to see is we want to do a contact where the last name equals the email address, but you can't type in, you can't say where it's the same as the email address field in here, it's got to equal an actual value. So again, we can come back to SQL for CDS and we can run a query like this one here. So find me details from contacts. Again, I'm only interested in active ones where the first name equals the last name. And I can find that I've got a Matt in there. A more common one, say for the Outlook integration would be where the last name equals the email address. And I've got a one in there with my email in. So they are easier to spot as you're just browsing around the system. If we have a look at my list of contacts here, they do kind of stand out a little bit. You can't really do too much to fix these automatically because you don't have the information to fix. If you did, it wouldn't have been the problem in the first place. So the resolution here really comes down to, again, either to training, if people are being just too lazy to put in the real information, you could try re-emphasizing why it's important, what processes that's going to drive further down the line. But if it does come down to they're putting it in because the system says they have to and they genuinely don't have that information, then maybe you need to go back and reassess which of those fields really are required. To me, a required field would mean that your business processes are going to break if that data is not filled in, not that it's just a nice to have. If you're making fields required when they're not really that required, you're kind of asking for your users to lie to you at some point, just by making up some data to put in there. On a similar vein, you can have data being reused across records. So this will often come in again where you got required fields, and rather than copying data from some other field on the same record, people get into a habit of just putting in the same made up data every time. So if you don't know that last name, maybe you always put an X or a test or a dot or something like that, just to fill out that required field so they can get on with their day and save the record and move on. So what this comes out as is this becomes a really popular value in this field. So if you have a look at the distribution of values across the field, you'll see the same data being used over and over again. Now, unfortunately, there's no way apart from drawing charts of everything to actually see what's the most popular data in CRM. But we can do it quite easily in Fetch XML Builder to start with. So if we start with a empty query here, and we say we want to go and have a look at contacts, and we've got a suspicion that somebody's messing with the last name data in contacts. So we want to select two attributes in here. So the first one will be the last name attribute, which we want to have a look at, and the other one is going to be the primary key, which is contact ID. So the key bit of information we need to set is right up at the top level on the fetch line. We want to say that we're going to be doing an aggregate query. So we're going to be looking at, rather than just individual records, we're going to be looking at the whole data in aggregate. On the contact ID, we want to have a look at how many contacts we've got. So we're going to have the aggregate set as being the count. And when you're doing any aggregate query, you've got to give all your columns aliases. So just give it a name. So we're going to give this name count. Find out how many contacts we've got. We want to break that down by last name. So we can group by the last name. Again, we've got to give it an alias. So keep things nice and simple. We're going to give it the name alias last name. And we can run that query. So that's not too helpful yet. We've got lots and lots of ones in here, all looking very helpful. Make this a little bit more useful, we can sort it as well. So let's add on an order. And we're going to order that by one of these aliases. We're going to order that by this count alias. And we're going to do that in descending order. So anything that's really popular is going to come to the top of our list. So if we order that, so we can see the most popular name is the name Carrington, because I've been putting in the test data. The next one is X, so that doesn't look right. So maybe we've got a problem here of people just making up data and just putting in X as the last name. So our follow-up query would then be to go and have a look in Advanced Find, maybe, find contacts with a last name of X. Do we have a particular culprit in there that needs some training? Or do we need to go back and readjust what those required fields are? So this approach of grouping data and then having a look at the most popular data, looking at the least popular data. If you've got numeric data, maybe have a look at the highest and the lowest values, and things can stand out there quite easily. If you're looking at potential quality errors in your opportunity data, and your opportunities are normally about, say, £10,000. If you've got values in there of £1 million, if you've got values of £1.50, they're probably the ones you need to look at. So if those extremes of highest and lowest, most common, least common, are well worthy of investigation, and you can do it all through this tool quite easily. Okay. We have a look at customer lookups. So these are a special type of lookup value in CRM, which can be either an account or a contact. You can create your own custom ones now as of a version or so ago. So they're very powerful in that way. But most companies that we see will generally pick one way of working. Either you'll want an account in there or you'll want a contact. And it's very rare that one company works in the way that you can actually have both in there. So typically, for example, the parent of a contact would be an account in a B2B situation. Maybe if you're B2C, you might use that parent lookup to relate one contact to another in some situations. Happens a lot through your opportunity quote or invoice pipeline, that each of those can be related to either an account or a contact. But again, if you're B2B, you're probably linking those to accounts. If you're B2C, you're probably linking them to contacts. So it's unlikely that you would want to have some link to an account and some link to a contact. But it is relatively easy to get wrong. If we just have a quick look, if I go and create a new contact now. So if I just put in my details in here, and if I put in the account name and I type in data 8 in here, sure, I get data 8 coming up, but I've also got all these contacts popping up as well, or when I've searched for data 8. Now this is driven by the quick find views on those records. So it's worth having a look at what fields that you're allowing people to search on in those quick find views, because it is kind of, it's highlighted there, it says data 8, so it's very easy for me to just click that one. And if I'm not looking at what comes back there and seeing that it's a person's name rather than the company name that I searched for, I've now got a contact linked to a contact rather than the contact linked to the account that I was kind of expecting. So it's well worth having a look at what those quick find views are set up as to try and help your users out here as they're building up these records. It is quite easy to find instances where this has happened. Again, just with advanced find, we can have a look at contacts, and by having a look at the related section, we can have a look at so the company name. So in this case, the customer lookup is company name. Any customer lookup will be in there twice, though, once with bracket account and once with bracket contact. If in my case I want ones, if I'm expecting all contacts to be linked to an account, I can have a look at ones where they are linked to a contact. That's the only bit of the query that I need. I don't care what that parent contact is. If I find any in this view, then they're probably wrong. So I can find one in there. So again, I need to go and investigate, find out why that happened. Either issue some more training or yeah, so have a look at that that quick find setup. Okay, orphaned records. This is possibly the most common one that we see. Orphan contacts in particular, so contacts that aren't linked to an account. So again, in the majority of B2B situations, you would expect to have an account, and that account will have contacts, and every contact should have an account. And we will commonly see people come to us and say, we've got all these orphaned contacts, what can we do with them? And although this might be a case of you're missing a required field, in which case I'd row back on my previous statements about trying to get rid of required fields, it's normally more to do with integrations. And again, the Outlook plugin is very culprit number one here. There's the option within the Outlook plugin to automatically create contact or lead records based on your the senders of emails that you track. And although it can create the contact, it's got no idea how to link that contact through to an account. So that has to be a manual job for someone to go back through and tidy up later. But it's one that's very easy to overlook. You know, you've done the job, you tracked the email, it's created the contact. I want to move on with the rest of my day. Again, really easy to find, less easy to fix generally, mostly because it's very laborious. So you can find contacts where the company name does not contain data, and that's all there is to it. So we've got a bunch of orphan contacts in here. To go through and fix these, though, you know, there's going to be no bulk update here because they're all going to be part of different accounts. So you've got to do a little bit of investigation for each one. So you can have a look at, say, the domain names as part of those emails. Maybe you go back and have a look through the activities that are tracked against them, because they're probably going to have emails tracked against them, if that's how they've been created. See what it is they're talking about are the company names in those emails that you can go and use to figure out what the account should be. So it's a little bit of investigative work to try and get these fixed again. It's probably not what you want to hear if you've got a few thousand of them, but unfortunately that's kind of what it is. A similar scenario to the inactive primary contact in an account, but kind of the other way around. So you could have an active contact, but within an inactive account. So this can mean that you then miss out on marketing to those contacts. And it could highlight a more general problem that maybe that account should not be inactive and you're missing out on marketing to that entire account. If this happens, you need to have a look into why. I think is what I'm really trying to get to there. If you've got an inactive account and it's got active contacts in it, something's gone wrong. It might be that the account should be inactive, and the problem is that your contacts should also be inactive and they're not. Or it could be that actually you are talking to these contacts, but the account has been deactivated incorrectly. So again, it's a bit of investigative work to try and figure out what's happened here when you find this as a problem. There's a few main causes listed there. Again, coming back to these quick find views. If you're creating a contact and link it to an account, if your quick find view isn't filtering out inactive accounts, it's very easy to go and just assign your shiny brand new contact to an old inactive account, and then it'll kind of get lost because you never find it again. So do check out the filtering on those quick find views. It could be that deactivation isn't cascading. So this shouldn't be a problem in accounts and contacts. The default behavior, I think, when you deactivate an account is that your contacts get deactivated as well. But if you're finding this in your custom entities that you're using, you might want to look at putting a solution in there to say that deactivation should cascade down that hierarchy. Or again, going back to integrations, might need to be a little bit cleverer. So if you've got an integration that goes and creates a contact when somebody fills out a form on your website and it tries to do something to automatically assign it to an account, maybe having a look at that domain name on the email address or anything like that. If it's not looking at whether that account is active or not, then it could be assigning these new contacts to the inactive account, and they'll never get picked up. Again, really easy to find through Advanced Find. I've lost my cursor. There we go. So contacts linked to an account. where the account is inactive. Can bring back 1 in this case. So we've accidentally deactivated this contact here. So again, now as a user, I've got to figure out which of those statuses is right. Is it the contact status that's wrong, or is it the account status that's wrong? So I've got to do a little bit of investigation here as an actual human to try and figure out what to do about it. Okay, I seem to be getting through these quite quickly, so do shout if you got some questions. So we can go on to sort of change tack a little bit. Switch to some different tools. Invalid picklist values. So this is entirely not on your users. You can't blame your users for this one, I'm afraid. This is all down to the admins. So if we have a look at the industries against my accounts here. So I've got 3 accounts. I've got one there that doesn't have an industry. I've got another one that doesn't have an industry. And I've got another one that doesn't have an industry. So I've got 3 accounts, none of them have got industries. But if I take my view here and I add on a filter to say where industry does not contain data, I actually find 2 of them. So what's going on there? How this comes about is if you've selected an option from one of your picklist fields, and then you go in and remove one of the values through the customization screens, that data doesn't get removed from your records. So I've previously had another industry in here, and by process of deduction, I can guess that that is the CRMUG record, previously had an industry assigned to it. But then an administrator's gone in and taken that away as being one of the available options. That record still has got something in that field. It's just that the application has no idea what it is, what text it's meant to have against it. So it can't show it. So it shows it as if it's blank. Now, when I've got 3 records here, I can find that out quite easily just by comparing those lists. That's obviously not scalable to your entire system of thousands and thousands of records. So at this point, we can use the data export validation tool. So if you have a search for that in XRM Toolbox tool store, you'll find this tool here. So what we can do here, so the way we use this is, first of all, if we click here to load in the list of entities we could validate. In my case, I'm going to do accounts. I think I've got a problem in the industry field, so I'm just going to go and pick that one. You can just get it to validate all your fields. In my case, I'm going to speed things along a little bit. It's a bit quicker if you only do it on one. And that's instantly said, I've got one record that doesn't have a valid value in that field, and it's this one here. And it's got this number in that field, but the system has got no idea what text is associated with that data, which is why it's not showing up in the main CRM application. So again, you've got to decide what to do with it at this point. So you could use a tool, so you could run an update statement in SQL for CDS to just simply blank out all the ones that have that number in that field and just change them back to null. If you've done it kind of recently and you kind of think, oh yeah, I know what that industry was, you could do a bulk update to change it to something that's still there and more helpful. If you've only got a few in here, you can update them manually. So you can actually just double click on this value here. That's just going to load up that record so we can go and make some changes to it. So I can go back over here. And I can even just change it back to that. So even though I've apparently made no change here, the system has taken that as being set it to blank, and I can just save that now. Or I can change it to something actually more helpful. So yes, not one that your users can get yourself into, but one for the admins. So
You
best
do
thing
have a
there.
question, Mark, before you move on to the
Sure.
next scenario.
Sure.
With regards to using the drop-down pick list, is there a way of deactivating the values rather than deleting them, which could get around it?
No, so there's no way to deactivate a value. There are some solutions you'll find online in various people's blogs to do sort of cascading ones where it'll kind of filter that list. So you might be able to adapt some of those scripts to hide some of those values. It would be a similar situation, I think, to doing some of those, but it's nothing out of the box to do that, certainly. Might be an interesting one if someone wants to create a PCF control or something maybe to do that, but no, not out of the box. So yes, the out of the box solution for that would be, before you delete a value, do a search to make sure that nothing's using it, and if anything is using it, update them first before you go and delete a value. Okay, and the last one I've got is a similar situation. So I've got it here as two long text fields. It could also apply to numeric fields, so currency values or simple numbers. They've all got restrictions on, in the case of text fields, how long the maximum length they can be. In the case of numeric fields and currency fields, what's the minimum and maximum values? That validation is always done at the point the data is entered, but you can go back and change the rules, and your data that was valid when you typed it in will still be there in the database, but will now be invalid. So a similar situation to the previous one with Picklist values, but in this case you will actually still be able to see the data. So if I go back and have a look at my example accounts here, if I have a look at these SIC codes in this case, so don't have any SIC codes on there. I go to Microsoft, I've got a bunch of different SIC codes on here. So I want to add an change this, but I can't type into there, it's already too long. In fact, if I just click in there and click out, it's giving me a warning to say that I can only have 20 characters in here. So I am 6 characters over the limit. So even though I haven't actually changed any of that, I can't save this record now simply because I've clicked into that field and now it's re-triggered the validation logic. So again, this comes from a very similar perspective of what we had to look at with the industry field. If you have a text field that's 100 characters long, you put in 100 characters into it, and then you reduce the maximum length of that field down to 20. Your 100 characters are still in there. The database is still capable of holding that 100 characters, but now your data that's already in it is now invalid for any future updates, and you've got to go back and fix that. Same idea with the numbers. And we can find that in the same way. So if we go back to the data export validation tool, if we just refresh this list here and validate the SIC code, we can find again, we've got one record there that's failing that. So we can see the name of the record, we can see the data that's causing it to be invalid, and we can double click there to go and go straight to the record that's invalid. This is a bit harder to find and fix up front before you change that that validation logic though. So although with before you delete a pick list value, you can go and find everything that uses it. Again, there's no standard way of being able to search for text values that are longer than a certain length. It's easier with numbers. You can obviously do searches for numbers that are higher and lower than whatever the new minimum or maximum is that you're wanting to put in. So you can certainly do that. But for text values, yeah, I don't really have a solution for you for that at the moment. Possibly something I could add into SQL for CDS, thinking about it. Okay, so that is the end of my 10 scenarios. So just to remind you, those tools, again, if you want to investigate some of these scenarios in your own data. Again, you can do an awful lot just with Advanced Find. If you want to take it a bit further, you can use the other 3 XRM Toolbox tools that are listed there. I do have queries to find all these 10 as one SQL script that you can run in SQL for CDS, so I can share that later as well. So you can do that very quickly without having to sort of try and recreate all these Advanced Find queries. Other than that, I'll take any last questions. Otherwise, thank you for coming along to my session.
You do have a question with regards to the recommendations around the quality of addresses.
Okay. So a little conflict of interest here. So as data rate, we've got some solutions for that. If you have a look for us on AppSource, we've got some options on there to help you either enter addresses more nicely, or you can tidy up addresses that you've already got. Happy to take any questions on that later, but that would be sort of commercial discussion, so probably not for this forum. But yeah, contact me later and I'm happy to give demos of any of those solutions.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Before everyone leaves, I think Mark did such a great job that he really deserves a round of applause. So if you're here, could you take yourself off mute and give Mark a round of applause for his brilliant session?
Okay, thank you, everybody.